Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Man in America. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. If I had to sum up the last 5 years of my life and just the life of being in this world, I'd say that from one angle, those 5 years have been one of realizing that most systems and most pillars of our society and the things that we thought were real that form our worldview have actually turned out to be fake, criminal, fraudulent, all kinds of bad stuff, malintent, satanic, whether we're talking about the music industry, the streaming, Netflix, these kinds of companies, the education system, the government, the big pharma. And maybe it's been longer for 5 years than you, maybe, me, it's been a little bit longer than that. But either way, it's been this process of just realizing that everything that I thought was real is not real. And it's been a process of finding what's real. Like for me, what's real is living off the land, getting chickens, learning how to grow my food, raising a family, having children, interacting with people over a fire. Like these are the real things that I really value. But I also value in my life exposing the falsehoods, exposing this false world, this cage they've built around us. They want to keep us trapped in, so we don't really understand how powerful our body is, or how powerful energy is, the energies of the world that can be accessed not through some limited fossil fuel resource like oil. There's so much to that. And so my guest today is something that you've probably seen going viral on TikTok or Twitter. That's Ian Carroll. He goes by, Cancel This Clothing Company. And he's someone that has done a phenomenal job making these short little videos that expose these massive lies. And so in today's show, we're going to be diving into the massive lie of the stock market and some really interesting information he has that helps you understand that the stock market is very, very rigged and controlled. At the end of the day, it's just there to take our money, to keep us poor, keep us owning nothing. So we'll be diving into the stock market, but not just the stock market, just the bigger picture of the collapse of the lies and what comes next. So folks, please enjoy this conversation with Ian Carroll. Hey folks, I've got a quick message for you. So I'm sure you've heard a lot of people, myself included, talking about the importance of buying precious metals, gold and silver. But what's really behind that? Is just a thing of, hey, buy this gold, buy this silver, right? Or is there something deeper that we should be looking at? So I recently came across some figures about house prices. So in 1930, the average family home was approximately $4,000. Fast forward to 2023, the average family home is just over $400,000. So you have to ask yourself, why is that? Is it because things have just gotten more expensive? No, it's actually because the dollar has lost 99% of its value since 1930, right? When people talk about the collapse of the dollar or inflation, this is what it means. Now, let's take a look at gold. So in 1930, if you wanted to purchase your home in gold, it would take approximately 200 gold coins. So 200 gold coins would purchase the average family home in 1930, about $4,000. Now, if you, instead of buying a home with that gold or cash, you set those aside. If you set aside $4,000 in cash in 1930, it would be worth $4,000 today. What can you buy with $4,000? Can you buy a family home? No, you can't even buy a crappy used car. But if you set aside $4,000 worth of gold coins in 1930, which is 200 gold coins, 1 ounce coins, that would be worth approximately $400,000 today. And this is the key lesson about precious metals. It's not about getting rich. It's about putting your money into an asset that protects you against inflation and against the destruction of the currency, which is what happens to all fiat currencies, especially now we're in the end days of the dollar. And so that's why it's important, maybe not all of your money, but a portion of your money, a portion of what you have, I highly recommend putting it into precious metals of gold and silver, because what it's doing is it's protecting you. This is an asset that has stood the test of time, not just stood the test of time since the 1930s. We're talking about the rise and fall of civilizations. Gold was used to buy houses back in ancient Rome. It's still around. It's an asset that will forever have its value. So folks, if you want to do this and you need someone that you can trust, there's no person I can recommend more than Dr. Kirk Elliott. He's a very good friend of mine. He's a strong Christian patriot, and he's out to really help people to protect their savings and what you've worked for against the destruction of the dollar, not to mention also protecting it against the dangers of central bank digital currencies. So to learn more about this, go to goldwithseth.com. goldwithseth.com or call 720-605-3900. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 720-605-3900. Both those places will allow you to set up a quick appointment where you can talk to a wealth advisor that will help get you started on this path. Again, goldwithseth.com, 720-605-3900. Ian, after seeing your face everywhere online, whether it's TikTok or Twitter or YouTube, it's great to finally have you on the show. So thanks for being here, man. It's really good to have you here.
Thanks a lot, Seth. I'm really excited to talk.
So it's funny because I think I was able to get you on is that I commented on one of your posts. I was like, hey man, I couldn't DM you. I put a post out saying, can you help me? Then I was interviewing Ashton Forbes, and Ashton Forbes was like, hey man, I saw your post and I was on his show and I'll connect you, and it all kind of connected up. So it's the magic of the interwebs, I guess.
Ashton's great too. It's a great way to cut through all the noise and the direct messages and connect through people to people. And Ashton's such a cool dude to connect to someone through. So I knew this is going to be great.
Absolutely. So you cover a wide range of topics, right? From the Illuminati, the Zionist control of the entire world, the music industry. But one of the things that you've done that I feel like I've learned the most from is you explaining from your perspective the stock market and how rigged it is, and not how rigged it is, but also is how cannibalistic it is, and how these giant monsters that are literally swallowing up companies. And I remember the companies of my childhood, Toys R Us, Blockbuster, GameStop, which we'll talk about, and seeing these companies go out of business. And it happened around this time. I was like, oh, well, I guess it kind of makes sense because it's the .com time. And of course, Blockbusters, they're not going to stay current. And Toys R Us, I guess it makes sense because Amazon. But watching your information, realizing like, whoa, this was intentional, and also understanding what's happening with GameStop was like, it really opened my mind. So I'd love to dig into that. And of course, we might go down some rabbit holes on other topics as well. But can you just kind of walk us through what you've uncovered with the stock market? And I want to kind of dive into the significance of what's happening with GameStop.
Absolutely. Before I do walk us through it, I want to sort of give a shout out to all the other people, a lot of them in the retail stock communities that have done a lot of this research for me and alongside me and before me. And a lot of what I've been putting out on this topic is not my original research, but rather me resynthesizing the work of countless other retail investors that have also been getting really curious about the stock market ever since the GameStop debacle in 2021. And that's worth noting in and of itself, that aside from all the fraud involved in the 2021 GameStop squeeze, aside from all of the crime that we kind of witnessed in that microcosm, that got a lot of regular people interested in digging into what's really going on in the stock market. And that's a really powerful force. And that alone is a story all in of itself, let alone what we've all discovered along the way and what you're referring to here. So the story that you're referring to in brief is the story of the evolution of the markets becoming more and more complex and more financialized, with new instruments and new high frequency trading and new ways for big money to kind of game the system and make more money. And as that has evolved, their strategies have evolved in tandem. And, not everyone in Wall Street are criminal scumbags. But there's enough criminal scumbags on Wall Street that if you give them loopholes and you give them ways to exploit the system, they'll use them. And so these companies that you're referring to, Toys R Us is like the early first example of Bain Capital realizing that they can use a leverage buyout to get a hold of the company for almost no money of their own. And then once they're inside of the company, they can actually mismanage the company into the ground and take out huge amounts of profit for themselves as a firm and for their buddies as shareholders. And if the company goes bankrupt along the way, they can actually have installed legal protections so that they get off scot-free and they're not really responsible for any of those damages and any of that failure. And they actually walk with billions of dollars, and Toys R Us burns to the ground, and they can just move on to the next company. And the whole market looked at that strategy, the ones that knew what was really going on. And that's a very mainstream story. Anyone can look up what happened to Toys R Us with Bain Capital. And everyone looked at that and realized like, hey, that's a pretty solid strategy if you're willing to do that to a company. And so they all started to look for other companies that, might be on the way down. And when you take that strategy that is sort of like an insider looting of a company, and you combine it with the strategies that short sellers were developing in the market, whereby they would pick on a company that they think is going down and they would just start to short sell that stock. So attacking it from a financial standpoint, all of those people are suddenly incentivized to do the same things, and their actions, when collaborative, all achieve the same ends, which is driving a company's stock price to zero, bankrupting the company, and they all walk away with massive gains. And so as you walk that strategy forwards in time, and they get better and better at it, as their friends in the media start to, report on the companies that are going down as they go down, these are all factors that lead to us regular people on the outside. We look at it and we just think, oh, it's like, yeah, it makes sense that Blockbuster's going out of business. Nothing to see there. But when you actually peel back some layers and look under the microscope, you start to find the same consulting groups showing up at all of these failing companies, consulting them in weird ways that don't seem like the best interest of the company and the shareholders. And then you see the same giant banks and financial institutions short selling the stock on the way down, and sometimes even naked short selling the stock, which is a whole other issue. And you get forwards in time to GameStop, and they've had so much success with this strategy that they're willing to be so flagrant about it as to accrue a 300% short interest, meaning that they have borrowed and sold every single share of GameStop that was supposed to exist 3 times over and more. And that was all publicly recorded because no one was really paying attention to it yet. And that's when GameStop came to the attention of a couple of really smart traders that had their eyes out. And that's where that whole story kind of took off. And at the time, none of the GameStop investors really realized what they had sort of accidentally stumbled on, I don't think. But once we saw the lengths that these short sellers were willing to go to sort of cover up the situation, to stop the trading, to get everyone to leave and sell the stock and move on to the next thing, that's when we started asking more questions. And those questions led us back in time to just see this whole bigger picture emerging.
So it wasn't the crime that caught the attention, it was the cover up of the crime that really made everyone say, hey, something really fishy is going on here. So
yeah, in a way, yeah.
So explain, you mentioned, short selling, which I'm somewhat familiar with, right? But naked short selling and GameStop being, oversold 300%. Can you explain those concepts a little more?
Absolutely. It's important to remember for all of us regular folks that the stock market in general, is intentionally made complex, sometimes needlessly, so that regular people don't understand it. That's the whole point. And that's how all of finance is. And it's linked to why they don't teach us about finance in school. Because if the mass population of regular people are ignorant to how this stuff works, it's a lot easier for the wealthy people that are making all the money off these systems to exploit those systems at our detriment to their benefit. So no one should feel ashamed that they don't understand these things at all. But it's actually not necessarily as complicated as they make it seem like it is. Normally, when you buy shares of a company, you're buying a company at a price that you hope is low, and you're hoping it goes up, and you sell it later for money, obviously. Short selling is like the exact opposite, where right now, today, you take out a loan and borrow some shares at a price that you think is high, and you're hoping the stock price is going to go down so that later you can buy back some shares and close out your loan by returning those shares to the person you borrowed them from. So it's a sell high and buy back low rather than a buy low and sell high. And that's perfectly legal, and it's a perfectly legitimate thing to do in the market. It's a good way for people that think a company's undervalued or overvalued to sort of even out their opinions over time. That's fine. Sometimes it can be abused. Because obviously when supply and demand comes into effect, if everyone is selling, that makes the price go down. And if everyone is buying, that makes the price go up. So in some ways, short selling can make a company's stock price go down illegitimately. But the real problem comes in when you do what's called naked short selling. And it is legal. It's kind of the boogeyman of the stock market. No one wanted to talk about it before GameStop happened because it's sort of they try to keep it under wraps, but it's technically legal under very certain circumstances. And it's kind of easy to understand why. Is in when we want to trade stocks, there's actually giant middlemen called market makers that are facilitating all the trades. Because if I want to sell this obscure share of this like green energy company that not a lot of people are trading, and I want to sell it for a really specific price, chances are there's not anyone else that's exactly necessarily selling that exact amount of shares for that exact price. It'd be a lot more efficient if the market had big people with lots of money that were willing to sort of match all of our trades all the time to make things trade faster, and they would just sort of level their books out and keep things flowing. And so they are often on the other ends of these trades. And if you're buying a share, you might be buying it straight from them. And sometimes if you wanted to short a company, if you wanted to borrow some shares to sell right now so that later you could make some profit when the price is lower, sometimes they can't find a borrower, a person to loan you those shares right away. So if I want to borrow the shares right now to sell them, they are allowed under the right circumstances to loan you shares that don't actually exist, synthetic fake shares, under the promise, the pretext that later today or tomorrow, they will find someone that is willing to loan those shares out. They'll make that borrowing happen legitimately, and then everything will be kosher and you'll be good to go. But the problem is that there are also mechanics that let them fail to deliver on that. They are also legally allowed to kind of kick the can on that, and it can kind of just it can start to get abused really quickly, because what you now have is a market where you have a mechanic by which shares that don't exist are allowed to be created and sold to buyers like us without telling us if those are real shares or not. And that's how you can wind up with shares that don't actually exist floating around on the market getting traded back and forth. And that's how you can wind up with the short interest of a company, meaning the percentage of the shares that have been borrowed and sold for short selling can go above 100% of the shares. And in GameStop's case, it was above 300% of the shares at a certain point there. And all of those shares aren't just floating in the market, they've been sold to people like you and me, and we now hold them in our accounts. So if you let naked short selling get out of hand, suddenly more than 100% of shares that are supposed to exist are starting to get locked up in accounts, and we aren't selling them. And so now there's this kind of ongoing debacle of how many shares actually exist, and no one will tell us.
Interesting. I mean, it kind of reminds me, but almost in a reverse way, of the banking industry and what happens when there's bank runs, where it's like the bank, especially before when they had no reserve requirements, you put $100,000 into the bank, they take that money and they go play the stock market with it, do God knows what with it, and they might have done that with 1,000 different customers, just because they hope that there's not that one day that 10% of the customers request 10% of their funds, which would then make the bank go under. So it seems like it's a little bit of more of that, which to me, a lot of this goes back to like Babylonian money magic. It goes back in this way of like also how they're keeping the silver price suppressed through all the silver paper, and how they're basically manipulating the market through fake stuff, whether it's fiat currency, fake stocks, fake silver certificates that actually don't match what's actually being held in the reserves. So it's crazy. But what's crazy though is that it seems like at the end of the day, it's always us that they're screwing, right? Like that, it's always us, right, that get hurt. And so with GameStop, there was a video that you did with Matt Baker, right? He's like the Viking guy that talks at like the city council meetings, who's hilarious, right? He's fun to watch. And you explain this tweet that he had, about how, like, can GameStop really affect that many people? It's just some video game stock. And so you got into the derivatives and everything. So maybe explain a little more how this act of holding, which is, if I understand correctly from that video, you were one of the earlier people back in the original, a couple of years ago, this original kind of movement of kind of bucking the system by buying and holding GameStop. So how could that actually affect this market where, you've got companies that are, look at, Apple or Google, or you have these massive, trillions of dollars worth of stocks floating around, whereas GameStop in the grand scheme of things is like, it's like the local ice cream vendor. So explain how this works and how the scale of it can work.
You just used a really good metaphor with talking about fiat currencies and fractional reserve banking. And it is kind of like the reverse, where they've been giving out all these fake certificates for shares. And we kind of realize that they're giving out fake certificate for shares. And normally they're not worried about it because either they'll get the company to go bankrupt and all of the fake certificates will disappear and it won't even matter. No one can count them then. Or they'll just kind of get us to keep selling them because eventually the stock price is going to go down and they'll just put out their articles that make us scared and we'll be like, I'm going to get out and cut my losses. And then no one will ever end up like figuring out just how many fake certificates were out there. And when we realize that that's what's going on, now we all just decide, okay, we'll just hold on to them and keep holding and we won't sell them. And we're just going to keep getting loud about like, what's in your vault, guys? Like how much silver is really in your vault? Because we're all holding on to these certificates and you can't have them until we see what's in the vault. And so in a way, it's like this like reverse Uno card of their own tricks. And now we've got this trump card of like, you can't legally force me to sell. And I'm not going to sell until I get to look inside your vault and expose the crime that's going on back there. And so onto this question of how can doing that with this one little company, GameStop, which is relatively small in the grand scheme of things, how can that affect the whole system? And it's important to remember that the people that are loaning out all these fake shares, these are some of the biggest market makers and hedge funds in the market. People like Citadel, for example, is one of the biggest market makers for all securities. They're tied into all the different banks. They're doing big trades with each other. So it's not that we're like directly addressing GameStop. It's that we're addressing the gigantic financial institutions that run the entire market, and they were betting down on GameStop, and we caught them in the play. And what they're doing in the rest of the market is they have all of these leveraged bets using these derivative contracts, which is a fancy way of saying they are fractionally reserve banking their bets on other things. So if they have $10, they can leverage that to trade as though they had $100. They just have to keep some collateral to make sure that if it goes south, they can cover the trade and close it all out. But they do that in that direction, and that direction. And you can look up the OCC, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency. They publish the statistics on how much derivatives trading is happening in the markets every year. And it's a little hard to like get into the charts and the numbers themselves, but it's in the hundreds of trillions of dollars of trades are being made by some of these banks. Like Goldman Sachs is one that is extremely over leveraged, where they have something like 400 billion in assets as of last year, and they have tens and tens of trillions of derivative trades open. And it's complicated because they use derivatives to hedge other positions. They use them to sort of balance everything out and make sure that it's safe. But the problem with derivatives like that is if anyone's doing anything underhanded with them, or they're using them to make some positions to bet really big on some things, you can use it to hide positions or to bet multiple times on the same stuff without really telling everyone you're using the same money multiple times. If anything goes wrong in that system, suddenly everything can start to break. And this happened quite famously recently with this firm called Archegos Capital Management that was run by Bill Hwang. And this is what caused Credit Suisse to eventually fail a year or two ago, is Bill Hwang was using a whole bunch of derivatives to make a whole bunch of risky bets on a bunch of meme stocks as well as other stocks. And he was trading with 6 different counterparties, like 6 different banks, essentially, without telling any of them that he was trading with all the rest of them. And he was way over leveraged, and none of them knew how much risk he had going on because he was intentionally concealing how much risk he had. And the moment that he made a wrong trade and his portfolio started to get away from him, which kind of lined up with the GameStop thing, maybe that's what did it, who knows, then his whole portfolio just blew up overnight, and Credit Suisse was the one that got left holding the bag. And then those contracts usually run for a year or 3 years. And 1 year later, when all of his contracts came to expiry and someone had to pay the bill, Credit Suisse exploded. And then UBS had to absorb Credit Suisse. And now you can find articles on the internet from the last couple months, just a year later, 2 years later, that UBS is suddenly needing extra cash infused. And so that's how a problem that starts small, like somewhere like GameStop short sellers getting caught in a position that's not entirely legal or intelligent, that can start to shake other market participants and expose how they've all been sort of screwing everyone over in the markets. And that can spiderweb out to everyone that's doing risky, shady things kind of behind the scenes.
that's starting to make more sense now. So I know that you've done some deep dives into BlackRock as an example, and the exposing the inner workings of this. So right now we're looking at GameStop, which is representative of a scenario that shows the fraud and not just fraud, criminality of what's happening.
Yeah.
So between GameStop and looking all the way up to say BlackRock, in your opinion, how much of the stock market is actually just a facade? I mean, how much of it is this real, thing that represents the global currency and the value of companies versus this giant conglomerate of lies and deception that these elites are using at will to steal our money, to bankrupt companies, to bankrupt countries? I mean, how much of it is actually the latter?
Man, that's a good question, and it's hard to have any amount of certainty about the answer because there's so much fraud that it's obscuring any semblance of reality. But from where we're all looking at it today, from my assessment, I think it's like at least 90% of the market is just smoke and mirrors and magic tricks. And you could do everything from down to the small, like the GameStop issue exposes that there are massive amounts of synthetic fake shares in every company, not just GameStop. The naked short selling issue is market wide. And there's numerous other examples. Overstock.com comes to mind, that expose that shares are not what we think they are. Furthermore, the shares that we all own are actually just IOU certificates, and the real shares are held by the depository and trust company. And that's a whole other rabbit hole that we're all trading fake fiat shares that don't actually have all the legal rights we're sort of led to believe they do. But then you can go further up to like BlackRock has multiple layers of sort of deception involved, where most people think that supply and demand happens to some degree in the markets and that our trades can affect what's happening with the stock price. But actually, the vast amount of the market is controlled by algorithms today, and BlackRock manages the biggest one called Aladdin, Aladdin. And Aladdin, some people estimate that it is responsible for up to 70% of the money flows through the markets, just pure algorithmic trading of massive institutional money moving back and forth. And that's on top of the SEC director, Gary Gensler, a few years ago, in response to the GameStop issue, admitted openly that 95% of retail trades, like our trades, regular people's trades, don't even go to the lit market, meaning the actual stock market. 95% of our trades are actually getting shuffled off into what they call dark pools, which is literally what they're called. That's not a made up word. And a dark pool is just a private little trading space, like in the back offices of the banks that are supposed to be trading our stuff on the open market. And instead, they put them in this back room where they just kind of match trades up sort of at a price that, makes sense. And they're probably going to make a little extra penny off of. And then they just give us whatever we were. And so there's all sorts of parts of the system that we are led to believe are a free and fair market that actually is like, this part here is not real, and this part here is actually not working the way they tell you it is, and this entire layer is full of fraud. And all the way up to the very top, which is sort of the head of the hydra of the more conspiracy theorist crowd about things like BlackRock, is that people think that, like, they say that BlackRock owns everything, and that's not exactly true. Like, BlackRock is a money manager that's managing assets on behalf of all of us, because we have our retirement money with BlackRock, we have our ETFs and all of our like savings funds in these BlackRock funds. But BlackRock controls all the voting power that all the shares that they manage represent. And we're all led to believe that the stock market's all about money, but it's the voting power that all of these shares, that voting power is what elects the corporate boards. It's what decides the CEOs, the pay, the direction of all the companies. And so there's this higher level of sort of a facade whereby we think that all these companies are competing in an open market. But if the same three biggest money managers, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, are managing something like 40 to 60% of the votes that decide how all these companies are run, like literally every company, all these competitors in the same industries, then how competitive is it really if they're deciding the leadership of Johnson & Johnson and they're deciding the leadership of Merck and Pfizer? It's like, right?
Folks, I have a quick message for you. Look, the 2024 election is do or die for the globalists and communists that have infiltrated our country and are currently running it. And they either have to win or they're going to destroy America so nothing is left either way. And if you're the person that's watching this show and following this information, unfortunately, you have the weight on your shoulders of making sure that your family is prepared, especially as we head into this next year and this next election cycle, because unfortunately, I think it's going to get rough. And one of the ways I know they're going to target us is through our food supply. You can see all the food factories burned down. You can see the warnings of coming famines and food shortages and everything like that. And food is one of the number one ways totalitarian regimes have always used to control the population is destroy the food supply. So if you don't have at least 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months worth of stored food, I highly recommend you take that very seriously because look, as I mentioned, if you're the person that's watching this, you're the person that carries the burden of making sure your family is prepared. I would recommend at least 6 months, if not a year, of storable food. So if things go haywire, whether it's grid down or terrorist attack from what's coming across the border, that your family can safely stay in place and you can feed your family. So, folks, today, go to heavensharvest.com and make sure you get your storable food that'll last for up to 25 years. Just in case things go south, you know that you have what's going to take to feed your family, which is so, so critical for us to get through this next stage of history. So go to heavensharvest.com today, order your food that'll last up to 25 years, and use promo code Seth to save 15% on your entire order. Again, that's heavensharvest.com and use promo code Seth, SETH, to save 15% on your entire order. It's crazy, but what I find to be really interesting with this, 'cause I love going back like that, 100,000 or million foot view and saying, okay, what's the bigger picture? Is there's the term the Great Awakening, and take it as you will, but I think it's very real in the perspective that a lot of people are waking up. Like I love going back to Plato's cave, right? The allegory of the cave that. We've been in a cave, I think, for millennia. Like we've been in a cave like since the Great Flood. Basically, there's been maybe even before that, right? That we have had these. Whether you want to get into like the fallen angels or the Anunnaki, or it's a whole other discussion. But that basically that there's these bad people that generationally are running the world and through their bloodlines and their wealth, and they're able to accumulate wealth over multiple generations. You look at the Rothschilds as an example, and how going back to the Bank of England and some crazy stuff that you can see. It's like, oh, where's your family? Where's your money come from? It's like, oh, from the 16th century when we were doing like drug running and gold trading like across the open seas. It's like, oh, okay, or we shorted the Bank of England or something crazy like that. So you have this. What they've done though, because they've gained so much control, is they have captured. And even not just capture, but they've established all of these different industries and mechanisms in our world. Looking at, say, not just big pharma, but the entire medical industry, going back into the Rockefellers and how they seized control of the medical industry. Obviously, the media, the education system, the majority of governments around the world, big tech. I mean, they've basically almost everything that we see around us is this shadow projected on the wall within the cave that they're using to distract us from what's real. So most people, they're born into it. You don't know that you're being born into it. It's like you take a wild animal, the third generation behind a cage will no longer understand that there's actually a forest out there it should be living in. But that's like multi generations, like for hundreds, if not thousands of years. This is what's been happening. And they've trapped us in this, even looking at energy, whereas most people are like, oh, okay, oil is made from the fossils of dinosaurs and we're going to run out. And so, that's why we need to have a green initiative and all these lies. They told us not only about how oil is renewable as an example, but actually there's, ether, there's free energy. They've hidden this tech. But getting back to this whole idea of the Great Awakening is what I see though, is that in all these different verticals of our society that form the pillars of our lives, that the narrative across all these different areas, it's all cracking, right? Look at what Ashton is doing. Look at this recent interview on Joe Rogan, Terrence, I forget his last name.
Terrence Howard,
right? Talking about, how even the periodic table of elements we've been given is a lie. It's been dumbed down from its original, probably much higher realm meaning as it relates to frequency and color and light. And so what you have happening though is that it's like all at once, all of these systems of lies that have been put into place are cracking and they're breaking, whether it's, you're helping a lot of people see through the facade of the stock market. It's like, the whole thing is a lie, right? Like G. Edward Griffin, the Federal Reserve, fiat currency. The
Yep.
whole thing is a lie. It's actually it's this ancient Babylonian money magic. Hollywood, the mainstream media, politics, right? Going back in, people talk about Edward Bernays and the whole left right, hey, we'll give them two choices, Coke, Coke and Pepsi, whatever. Like people are starting to see through all this stuff. And what I see with what you're doing specifically as it relates to the stock market is you're helping people to see that it's just another one of the rigged systems. And when you start to realize that, you learn that their rules are different than ours, and you start playing by their rules instead of our rules, and their system comes crashing down. And it's just exciting, actually, because you can see it happening. You can see the destruction of the old guard in real time if you know where to look.
It's an extremely hopeful time. I think a lot of people, because the irony is that this great awakening is paired with us all learning these lies, with us all being exposed to how much of the world is a lie. And so it can feel disheartening. Like it can feel like suddenly the world is getting so much worse. Suddenly everything is, but actually what's happening is all the lies that were already all around us are getting exposed. And so for me, I actually find it to be an incredibly hopeful time. There will always be evil in this world. There will always be corruption and degeneracy, but exposing it is the first step to changing it. And certainly there's growing pains. Like I think what this phenomenon that you're talking about is largely being facilitated by this new decentralized media where everyone has access to information and everyone has a voice to share. And that inherently comes with the problems of people getting things wrong, people like latching onto things that aren't real. It's like now that we don't have a centralized authority to tell us which lies to believe, sometimes we're going to stray into our own lies that we accidentally believe. But that's the process of learning, of becoming more responsible for our own information and our own perceptions of the world. And I see nothing but up as far as the human potential that's unlocked by us all having a voice and us all having access to information where historically those have been very guarded things.
And so looking at the stock market and getting it even into like economic shock testing, and I'm not sure if you've ever read Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars, where they talk about,
oh man,
I'll tell you about it after the show. Like that's a book that you could read 100 times over. And it like basically, I'll pull it up really quick. It's called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And I'll bring up just an image of the book cover. But basically, it is a book. This is what it looks like right here. I've got it like front and center in my library. It's called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And so basically what it is and there's kind of disagreements on the origins of it, but how it's presented is that there's a guy, I think it was in the 80s, that was buying and recycling copier machines. And he bought this copier machine that contained in it this printout, like this book called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. And if you read the language of the book, it was distributed at what I believe to be the very first Bilderberg meeting back in, I think it was in 1958. And it's mind-blowing to read it, because what it does is it goes through their whole program to destroy America, because America stands in the way of the New World Order, and to basically seize control of people. But it goes into how they use mathematics, and they brought in these mathematics and these economists because they found that they'd used like this, what they call economic shock testing, where they would find through their studies, this is back in the 60s and 50s and 40s, that if they changed the price of cigarettes, hypothetically, by 3%, that they would see an increase of, say, domestic violence by 5%. They'd see an increase of people going to the bar and drinking by 10%. And so because at that time, this is when they're just starting to roll out the UPC codes where they could actually track purchasing. So what it did is that we look at money as money. They look at money as a form of measurement. They look at it as a piece of data that reveals what's actually happening in society. So they learned how to use what they call economic shock testing, which is the same way as that they described how you'd have an airplane or a missile, which they would expose to the amount of shock to see when the bolts would start coming out of it, to see how they could actually strengthen, right? So how fast it could go, et cetera. So they'd use those same principles and theories on the people. but it goes into how money is actually a representation of energy and how it's flowing, and how they would occasionally have to use a war to reset the energy flow. Like they'd use these wars
Yeah.
strategically. And but it goes into how they would dumb down the American population, that they'd replace our entertainment with third grade entertainment. They would intentionally send our young men off to wars to destroy the morale of the country and to to destroy the family bond between men and women and between mother and child. Anyway, it's a wild, wild book, but
That's interesting.
when you look at the stock market as an offshoot of this, you can see that the stock market is this very powerful tool that they've used. Like they can use it to collapse currencies, to collapse countries, to even getting into the currency stuff. It's wild actually. Like so, I think like what you're unveiling here is something very, very significant for one of their tools to control our world, and how it's undoing, I think it's like a major hole getting blown into that cave that so many people have been stuck in.
Absolutely. It's not just exposing one of, I mean, I think the more important part of what you're talking about is the exposure of this weapon, more or less, that they're using, this measurement and weapon and system of control from the top down, but also exposing, I think another part that's really important is exposing from the bottom up how most people don't realize how the stock market actually affects all of our lives every day. Even if you have zero money invested in the stock market, most people think of it as like this thing for finance bros and this thing for like the Wolf of Wall Street that it's not part of my life. I don't do it. Or it's like I have a 401k, but that's all I got. But no, the stock market affects the price of your eggs, the price of your energy, the price of everything that's in your home, in the room you're sitting in right now. All of that came from things interfacing with the stock market. And the stock market is interfacing with all of the commodities that make our products, interfacing with all the food that feeds us and fills our grocery stores. And the decisions of all the corporations that are on the stock market are the types of decisions that determine whether there's poison in all of our food, whether there's toxic chemicals in all of our personal care products. Like this affects everyone. And it is deeply tied not just to our like economic and like stuff life, but also to our health and our emotional, our mental, our physical well-being as well.
Absolutely. And so I'm gonna pull up. This is just I went and found. You can find this book everywhere
Cool.
because it's PDF. I'm going to read a little bit here talking about economic shock testing, because this kind of goes into it. And this is straight from the book. So it says, in recent time, now keep in mind, this was supposedly published in 1958. Okay.
Mhm.
So it says, in recent times, the application of operations research to the study of the public economy has been obvious for anyone who understands the principles of shock testing. In the shock testing of an aircraft airframe, the recoil impulse of firing a gun mounted on the airframe causes shock waves in the structure, which tell aviation engineers the conditions under which some parts of the airplane or the whole airplane or its wings will start to vibrate or flutter like a guitar string, a flute reed, or a tuning fork and disintegrate or fall apart in flight. Economic engineers achieve the same result in studying the behavior of the economy and the consumer public by carefully selecting a stable commodity such as beef, coffee, gasoline, or sugar, and then causing a sudden change or shock in its price or availability, thus kicking everybody's budget and buying habits out of shape. They then observe the shock waves, which result by monitoring the changes in advertising prices and sales of other commodities. The objective of such studies is to acquire the know-how to set the public economy into a predictable state of motion or change, or even a controlled, self-destructive state of motion, which will convince the public that certain expert people should take control of the money system and reestablish security rather than liberty and justice for all. When the subject citizens are rendered unable to control their financial affairs, they of course become totally enslaved, a source of cheap labor. Not only the prices of commodities, but also the availability of labor can be used as means of shock testing. So it goes into here, for instance, it says, for
Wow.
example, there's a measurative quantitative relationship between the price of gasoline and the probability that a person would experience a headache, feel a need to watch a violent movie, smoke a cigarette, or go to a tavern for a mug of beer. And it's most interesting that by observing and measuring the economic models by which the public tries to run from their problems and escape from reality, and by applying the mathematical theory of operations research, it is possible to program computers to predict the most probable combination of created events, shocks, which will bring about a complete control and subjugation of the public through a subversion of the public economy by shaking the plum tree. Like
And that was
1958.
written before AI was even dreamt of.
Yeah. Like anyway,
That's an incredible
it's
book. I'm going to
mind
read
blowing,
that.
man. Yeah, it's mind blowing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people in like on Twitter, for example, like in the public, especially like who would get branded as conspiracy theorists, I think too often overestimate the skill of the human capital of the people trying to control the world. Like they overestimate the skill of like CIA operatives as though they had the resources, the budget, and the ability to like run a whole bunch of fake like influencers or run a whole bunch of fake like to do things that are far more complicated than people realize. And I think a lot of people underestimate the skill and advanced abilities of things like economic um like analysis like that, of AI manipulation of our sort of thoughts and public perceptions of our culture. Those are where I get really worried, because you don't need, a huge team of thousands of agents to do that kind of thing. You just need a room with a couple really smart people and some algorithms, and you can run that for days from anywhere in the world.
So, a lot of folks are not a big fan of all fruits and veggies. Some taste great, but many don't. And you have to admit, when you're in the produce section, all those vibrant colors of fruits and veggies look so good. Balance at Nature explains that all those colors you see in the produce section equals nutritional variety. Different colors signify different key nutrients. So, if you only eat your favorite one or two veggies, you're missing a whole world of vital nutrients. And that's why you should eat a big variety of fruits and veggies. Well, I decided it was time I start taking Balance of Nature's fruit and veggie supplements each day. And get this, some Balance of Nature customers say the fruit and veggie capsules taste so good, you can actually chew them. So I gave Balance of Nature a try, and I'm glad I did. Are you ready? So whether you order online or call them direct, you must use a promo code Seth to get this special offer of 35% off and free shipping on your first order. As a preferred customer, call them at 800-2468-751 and use discount code Seth, or order online at balanceofnature.com. Use discount code Seth to get 35% off and free shipping on your first order as a preferred customer. It's also crazy to look at what they're doing primarily at that point just through UPC, right? And through their own, probably really, probably very advanced computers for the time, because we know that their technology is far beyond what we perceive it to be.
Yeah.
But then imagine what they can do now with not only the algorithms and the AI, but also the amount of data they're bringing in. Like, I'm convinced that they've got that my phone, for instance, is reading my brain waves. I'm convinced it's reading my thoughts. It sounds like I'm some tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but like, I've seen videos of people actually, they've gone and they've actually they did a search on Google or on Facebook. They then thought about something heavily for the next 2 days, like puppy food, puppy food, puppy food.
Uh-huh.
And they'll find that the ads for puppy food start coming up in their feed. Like, I've seen the videos of this. And so
I would not put it out of the question. At this point, I don't put much out of the question, because like a lot of things that were supposed to be tinfoil conspiracy theories were not.
exactly.
And we know that there's a lot of advanced technology behind the scenes that we're not being told about. And in that case, like Havana syndrome is just one obvious example of something that is clearly like a brain interfacing technology that does exist, that is acknowledged, that they're not disclosing what it really is. Not to mention all the other UAP technologies that are behind the scenes at this point. Yeah, I would not put it out of the question.
So kind of a big picture question for you. So we're talking about the exposure of lies of all these different systems that people are now seeing through, like the medical one being a big one. What, in your opinion, do you think is one of the most significant and most important lies that you see right now as being exposed?
Ooh, that's such a good question. There's a lot of obvious answers, like trust the experts and trust the science. Um, but that I think from my perspective, the biggest lie that's being exposed right now probably actually has to do with capitalism and our health, um, in the sense that we've all sort of been led to believe that corporations will lie and cheat. They'll do bad things for profits, but they won't necessarily collude on a grand scale or push large agendas in order to like they wouldn't take it that far, right? But a lot of the disclosure that's happening across multiple areas are starting to expose how it's not just that this group is profiting off of your sickness, but this group is profiting off of causing your sickness. This group is profiting off of like the care there, and there's just so many aspects, whether it's from the COVID angle or it's the chronic disease angle or it's like the healthcare industry. Like COVID did so much to expose the way that the medical system can be purchased and or subverted. And once that lens, now that it's being turned back on all the other questions about our chronic health, about our hormonal health, about other social movements happening around such things, I think a lot of people are subtly starting to wake up to the confluence of all of those things and looking at the health of American citizens today, and not just the physical health, but also the emotional and mental health of Americans today. And I say this is maybe the biggest thing yet because it's not even getting all put together yet by too many people as one bigger picture. But the bigger picture is that all of these corporations and darker interests in our world are all profiting in their own ways off of us all being sick, distracted, unhealthy, and unhappy. And we all sort of had a sense of that in various arenas for a long time. I think a lot of people did, but it's starting to come really into focus how broad that spectrum is and how many people are making money off of it in different directions. And how, I mean, there's a lot of problems in the world today, but I think the biggest problem at home is mental, physical, and emotional health in all of its forms, causing problems like homelessness crises, causing problems like gender crises, causing problems like all these social crises that come out of us not being healthy, happy humans with a strong community.
So it's almost like if you imagine that humans are a bunch of rats living in this little society that they've made in a big cage, and they feel like they're pretty happy, they're going pretty well, but then the rats realize that the humans in the lab coats have actually been poisoning their food every day, right?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, that these rats are dying off, and oh, there's Granny Rat, and she died, but that wasn't right. And so they're realizing that the people they thought were controlling and looking after them are actually the ones that are killing them and keeping them intentionally sick and keeping them in a cage. And it's interesting that you mentioned that because obviously there's things like free energy and ether and some of Tesla's research that, now like Ashton's a big guy that's bringing that kind of information up now, which is huge. Like that changes a lot of things if you realize like, wait, like I can generate energy by building this device that actually captures it from the air the same way my computer, gets Wi-Fi, right? So that's a big one. But you're right. I think that in terms of people actually experiencing at a visceral level the lie, that there's nothing quite like the fact of realizing that your own physical body has been poisoned and they're trying to actually kill you. And whether it's the fluoride in the water or the chemtrails or the jabs into the children, whatever it is, like that's a big one. I think I mean, do you think that as that gets unveiled, that enough people will see the truth that there's some sort of populist uprising against not just like say a particular government, but just people uprising against the system, like that the rats are going to realize, hey, we got to break out of this cage. We should be living in the forest. Let's like eat the jugulars of these people that are like doing this to us.
Yeah, it's very Rats of Nim, the secret of Nim going on out here. And I think it's inevitable. I think that people get caught in it, like it's the same in finance. People get caught looking at like the daily chart, the micro view, and it's always when in doubt, zoom out. And every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Every pendulum swings back. And so the more evil that's spewed into the world, the more people are affected by that and are woken up to it. And it's the most obvious way to look at that is to just look at how as the economy has gotten worse and worse and worse over the last 6 years or whatever, more and more people have felt that financial pain. And that financial pain alone serves to wake people up beyond all the other factors that are serving to wake people up. And so people like manipulation of the health industry has been happening for decades, but it's not until they go full COVID on the world and do all these lockdowns and inevitably make lots of mistakes and get lots of things wrong and fail to cover up all the crime that inherently cracks their own system. The same could be said of what's happening in the Middle East right now. It's like if you do a slow drip of evil into a thing, it's a lot easier to miss. But the more you inject evil into a system, good is an inherent part of of all people. Like God and the opposite are inherent to all systems. And so the more that evil has prevailed, the more that evil is in us, in our world, the more people inherently wake up to look for the good and see the evil all around them. And so I think that people can be pretty like depressive and low on hope about the whole situation. But inherently, the more they make us sick, the more our spirit inherently yearns to be healthy again.
It's such a good point, and actually, I go back to the whole yin yang a lot with this,
Yeah.
and looking at just the mutually opposing forces of good and evil, of
Yeah.
up and down, and which a lot of it also ties into. I see that's kind of cool. You got your mason jar water cup there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But
Drink your water.
oh yeah. Yeah, this is Berkey water from a well. It's not fluoride city water. So,
Yeah.
but I had that sense also, and I'm really glad also that you mentioned earlier that this feeling that it can feel like the world has gotten so much more evil, but I really believe that evil, the greatest strength of evil that evil has, is its ability to cloak itself. And that when the evil is hidden, it's actually the most strong, right? The criminal that's trying to kill you is most powerful when when he's hiding in the closet and you have no idea that he's there, because he can catch you off guard. But if you walk in your living room, you see him sitting in the corner with a knife in his hand, you've got a chance. Actually, you're like, hey, like you're going to kill me, and I'm not going to let it happen. So I'm going to kill you first. And so I think that it is tough, right? And it's also, I'm sure that you've experienced this as being someone that's trying to expose these truths. It's difficult sometimes to be looking at this stuff and realizing, gosh, this is real, especially as you get into the stuff with children and getting into some of the ritual sacrifice and SRA victims, and like that's some heavy stuff that I've listened to some interviews with people that have been part of SRA families, and it's like that's satanic ritual abuse for those who aren't familiar with it, with the name, and it's some dark stuff. It really is, but the fact that so many people are seeing it now, that does give me hope. And so what do you, and I'll ask you to kind of extrapolate into the future a little bit, because I love getting into more like these philosophical discussions. Like, what do you, now that these cracks are forming in this dam, right? Or the cave we talked about, the walls are crumbling and the sunlight's starting to kind of peer through these cracks, and everyone's kind of seeing, hey, what's that? And they're looking away from the shadows and turning off CNN and turning off the Hollywood movies and the MGM records and all this kind of stuff. They're seeing it. How do you see it playing out? Like, because we're up against this cabal that's very powerful, very well funded, and they're a lot of ways very desperate to maintain control. So as more people wake up to this, and that system weakens and weakens, what do you see as the nexus? Like, how does that unfold where the good actually shifts and becomes more powerful than the evil in this world?
This is where I think realism is really important. And it's important not to go to war with rose tinted glasses, so to speak. Like, you should go into a hard time prepared for hard times, and you shouldn't be afraid of that. You should be invigorated by that. You should be excited by that. You should be excited to be able to do your best in those times. And I think that times are going to get harder before they get better, because inherently, as the evil in our world is challenged, it will rise to do everything it can to hold its power. And as we've been talking about just now, is that evil is largely based on a system of lies, and it needs to rely on those lies. It needs a world filled with lies in order for evil to self-perpetuate. And the moment that truth starts to get told, evil has to fight back against that, because all of these corrupt systems are alert. Like, lies are or rather, truth is their kryptonite. And they have so far controlled the media space so effectively for, hundreds, if not thousands of years, that it's been relatively easy for them to just sort of like perpetuate their plans and do what they're doing. But now that truth is being decentralized, now that we all have so much power to learn and to share and to speak, they have to come for that. And we've already seen them trying in multiple ways over the last couple of years. And it makes me think of a quote that I heard Ryan Dawson once say. I don't know if he's the original man that said it, but he said that for a lie to be perpetuated, you have to say it over and over and over. But for a truth to be perpetuated, you only have to hear it once, right? Because a lie has to be reinforced. Like a lie has to, because it is counter to what you observe all around you. Whereas the truth is immediately apparent. And when you hear it, you can't help but start to see it yourself. And so I think the truth is inevitable just by the nature of truth. And the only thing that can uphold lies is a system that fights actively to subvert the truth. And so I expect us to be moving into a year where there's a lot more attacks on free speech, a lot more censorship incoming, a lot more attacks on platforms like X and people like Elon Musk trying to undermine them financially, undermine them politically, blackmail them, whatever it is. And I think that we all need to be prepared to expect those things, to move with those things, and be ready for possibly some rather hard times, be that financial, spiritual, or potentially even physical. Like it's possible that we're looking at some sort of larger scale armed conflict in the next 3 to 10 years or something. And, hard times make hard men. And so we've been in the times where easy men made easy times, and those easy times are about to get back around to the hard times where we're all going to have to step up to the plate. So,
yeah, certainly. Someone I had the show on recently, they told me the quote, I think it was St. Augustine. It said something to the effect of, like, truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it. If you just release it, it'll defend itself. And
yeah.
I like that. And actually, there's one other quote I wanted to pull up that really came to mind. Behold a Pale Horse, which this is like a very formative book in my reading. And this is the great Bill Cooper. And at the beginning of this book right here, he puts this, which is written by this guy named Delamer DeVeris, if I pronounce his name right. And I think it's worth reading because I think this right here highlights the importance of what you and I are both doing. It highlights the importance of what everyone that's watching this content is doing by sharing content, by participating and spreading the truth. And so it says, one basic truth can be used as a foundation for a mountain of lies. And if we dig down deep enough in the mountain of lies and bring out that truth to set it on top of the mountain of lies, the entire mountain of lies will crumble under the weight of that one truth. And there's nothing more devastating to a structure of lies than the revelation of the truth upon which the structure of lies was built, because the shock waves of the revelation of the truth reverberate and continue to reverberate throughout the earth for generations to follow, awakening even those people who had no desire to be awakened to the truth. I just always thought that was such a powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's exactly where we're at today, is that they've had a walled garden around the information space where they have been allowed to construct these mountains of lies. And we now have access to that walled garden, and the truth is just pouring in. And it's taking time for everyone's individual space, because obviously we all sort of have our own media spaces, our own little limited hangouts that we've cultivated around our own minds. But slowly the truth is making its way into everyone's different media spaces through all different people waking up and speaking up.
Exactly. And I've seen with yourself that you've just exploded on Twitter. And I think recently there was a show you were doing, you had like 60,000 people watching live. Like it was some just crazy, like, that's like prime time.
Wild, yeah.
That's prime time, like CNN type level of people tuning in. I mean, it's incredible, but it's people like you that are not controlled by the CNN agenda, not owned by BlackRock, et cetera. So
it's
as
worth mentioning too that,
yeah, please.
That some of those live streams, like one of the biggest ones that I've done so far, it reached up to 100,000 people watching live on a Friday night. And it was a 4-hour long live stream where we were just reading FBI documents about 9/11. And it wasn't like some high production value, like exciting show with guests and flashy. It was just me hanging out, reading real evidence about what really happened on 9/11 that's in the public record. And that grabbed 100,000 live viewers out of nowhere. Like that is so cool that there is that appetite for truth out there, and that is like you can just be a single person in a room with a camera and draw that much attention to evidence of crime, evidence of corruption, just what, like, people are just that interested to know that. And the mainstream news is doing like everything they can to just get any amount of dollars they can just to stay afloat at this point.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to make sure that we draw attention to your Twitter handle. So this is Ian Carroll at Cancel Clo Co. I'll make sure that I put all of your links into the description. You've also, I want to encourage people to also check you out on YouTube, right? This is another place that people can watch your videos. Great production. I mean, obviously people are watching you now. They know what kind of person you are and how well you can speak. So here's your YouTube channel. I'll put that link in. Do you have a Rumble channel set up?
I do. Both Rumble and YouTube is Cancel This Conspiracy.
Okay.
So in general, on the short form platforms where it's vertical, I'm Cancel This Clothing Company. And when I started moving into the long form platforms, I wanted to give myself a slightly different brand with a little more space. So Cancel This Conspiracy on YouTube and Rumble. And I'm really excited to grow that more, both with interviews and live streams like this, with all sorts of different documentary style videos. It just opens up the possibilities for so much more. So
great. Now, tell us about Cancel This Clothing Company. Let me see. I've got the let's see, where is I think I had the link open.
Yeah, Cancel This Clothing Company. I mean, really, it was just a fun name. It was kind of just a fun name that I specifically designed when I started on TikTok to be catchy and memorable, but also a little mysterious and weird. And I knew that starting on TikTok, it would be good to have like an alternate revenue source, but I also I knew that it would be best not to push it. So it kind of started as an inside joke of like, yeah, I'll make some clothing on the side and people can buy it if they want, but I never pushed it or anything. And I don't sell that much of it. I sell a little bit, but for the longest time, for months, none of my followers even knew that I sold clothing. And it was kind of became an inside joke among us. So if anyone does want any of the shirts they see me wearing, like Food, Not Pharma, or Seek the Truth, Follow the Money, it's all there. And I make about $3 to $5 off of each shirt. But really, the website is just a simple landing page for people to find all my socials from. I've got a bunch of spreadsheets that I publish for free. If you go to the resources tab at the top there, on the left there, you can see there's a whole bunch of links to various spreadsheets where I have done a whole bunch of research in grocery stores. These are all free resources there. And it has all the different brands and companies that you find on your grocery store shelves for products like cereal or tampons or baby food. And it'll tell you which brands are owned by giant mega corporations and which brands are owned by family and founder owned companies, which can make a huge difference if you start switching your purchasing from giant corporations that are all held by BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street and bring it all back down to local companies, small businesses. And it's not that hard. A lot of times it's the same exact prices. It's just the knowledge of which ones are actually just the illusion of choice and which ones are actually a real company doing something real with their products.
Which is really important, because not only are you supporting small businesses and not supporting these giant companies, but you're buying products that they're not going to give you cancer in 3 years, like
exactly
aluminum in your deodorant and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, the first one that I did was actually the tampon aisle. And it just kind of occurred to me as like, I'm in the grocery store right now. I could just go straight to the aisle and take a photo. And then I started coloring out all of the companies that were actually just Johnson & Johnson or Procter & Gamble and it turned out that like my entire grocery store aisle, like the whole shelf of tampons, there was only like this tiny little, like one little product that was not a giant mega corporation. And all of those tampons are full of carcinogenic compounds, but also like reprotoxic compounds, as in when they are in a place near to your reproductive organs, they are toxic to your reproductive organs. And so tampons is a great example of a product that it's really good to get from a female founder-owned company that actually cares about your reproductive health instead of putting like literal poison into your reproductive products.
It's just insane. It's insane.
Yeah.
Ian, it's been such a pleasure having you on. I look forward to many more of these shows. I think we could talk for hours and hours. And just thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being a voice for truth out there. I encourage anyone who's watching or listening. I really encourage them to follow your Rumble channel. That's where I try to direct most of the people, because I'm so censored and shadow banned on YouTube. And of course, the YouTube users, it's there. We'll put it in there. But let's see if we can get your Rumble channel to grow.
There's content on my Rumble that's not on my YouTube, because YouTube won't let me talk about certain things.
Yeah. Yeah, and actually, I think we can put this one on YouTube as well because I think that
Yeah,
we
pretty
didn't hit
good.
any of like the YouTube stuff. So unfortunately, like most of my content is not on YouTube, and people on YouTube will comment like, "Why do you only cover financial news?" It's like, well, because like that's the only thing I can cover without talking about like the globalist plans to
Yep.
kill us all. So anyway, it's been awesome having you on here. Any final words as we wrap up?
Oh, I just really appreciate it, Seth. This was a really fun conversation. I loved all the cool resources that you brought in and some of the great quotes that you brought in. That was really cool. And I'm excited to go check out this book that you were mentioning. So thanks a lot for having me on. And I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Take care, man. Folks, at the very heart of our democracy lies a principle we hold sacred: free speech. It's the cornerstone that supports every freedom we cherish. Yet, in today's digital age, discussions about our wealth, our rights, and our future are being silenced or overshadowed in mainstream narratives, leaving many feeling voiceless in conversations crucial to our financial independence and security. This is where wealth protection research steps in, armed with a mission that's never been more critical. Wealth Protection Research is not a financial advisory firm. They're defenders of free speech committed to giving a voice to the silenced. Wealth Protection Research tirelessly seeks out financial experts. These are the voices that challenge prevailing narratives, especially as we navigate the uncertainties of the 2024 election. Wealth Protection Research has created a 2024 Election Wealth Protection Report. This free report highlights the three best ideas for protecting and growing your money heading into the 2024 election. It contains ideas the mainstream media won't even touch, and listeners can get it completely free. So text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy. If you believe in the sanctity of free speech and the importance of financial freedom, then act now. So text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy of this 2024 Election Protection Report. It's time to widen the scope of what we're told, to hear the ideas the establishment does not think you can handle, and to take control of our financial destinies. So, folks, today, text ideas to 76626 to claim your free copy.